And I'm back. Right, this next video is quite a long one, and it's regarding starter problems, intermittent start problems. And if you've not got a Moto Guzzi Griso, a Norge or a Stelvio, whether it be 1100 or 1200, then this probably isn't for you. It's quite long, but it does cover the trials and tribulations of overcoming electrical starter problems. It's not the engine, it's the starter motor type. It won't crank over. So if you have got one of the above, or you're just interested in general Moto Guzzi electrics, this might be for you. So the problem doesn't always start. Had the bike about 18 months now, I guess, and when I bought it, no problems at all. It's been started and it's always on an Optimate 4, but let's see if it starts now. And there we have it. Now, as you can see from the headlight, it's not just clicking, as some people experience starting problems. It's not just the starter relay. I can hear the starter relay, I can feel the starter relay clicking in. I can also feel the solenoid. It's a pre-engaged starter motor. The solenoid is engaging. That then transfers the power across to the starter motor itself. And the fact that you can see it holds in for about, I don't know, 5-10 seconds, and you can see the headlamp dimming as well. So there is a load on the battery. So that's what's happening. Doesn't happen all the time. 5 minutes time, it might do that a couple of times, and then it will start every time for 10 times on the trot. And you think, great, let's go out for a ride. It won't start. It's not cold. It's winter, it's January, but it's particularly mild day today. It's always in the garage. The boiler's in the garage as well, so it's never really that cold, unless I'm doing any spray work or anything. It's in very good condition. It's not all rusty, corroded, and so on and so forth. So that's the issue. Being an electrical engineer in the telecommunications industry, I thought I'd draw a little diagram. So I started off with a circuit diagram, which is kind of logical in terms of how is it connected, as opposed to a wiring diagram, which is how it's actually physically wired. But anyway, let's start with it. So we start with the battery. Obviously, this side of the battery is earthed, and it goes without saying I've cleaned and checked all of the connections. The other side connected to via fuse to various bits of wiring and so on. And if we go back to the start of it all, at some point or other, it starts off with an earth. You've got your starter switch, the button you push. You've got your kill switch, which is a normally closed circuit. So i.e. when you push it in, it opens the circuit and prevents you from starting it, and also kills the engine. It's not simplistic as that, obviously. And then we've got three switches, which everyone sort of says, oh yeah, on various forums, oh, it's your side stand switch, oh, it's your clutch switch, or it's your neutral switch. Now these, it's not quite as simple as this, because again, various different combinations and so on. But for the purpose of this, just to explain it, your neutral switch, it has to be in neutral to start it. You don't want to be starting it and tearing off down the road completely out of control. If it is in gear and you pull the clutch in, a normally open switch, then it will allow you to start it, because the circuit is made by the clutch and not the neutral switch. There's also the side stand switch. The side stand switch means that if it's in gear and your side stands down, then you can't operate it. You can't start the engine. But it then goes through to the starter relay, which I think This is one of the relays that was in the side panel, which I've moved to the under the seat. And basically that's just the coil of the relay. And that obviously connects via a fuse at some point back to the positive side of the battery. So we've got our circuit complete through one of these or two of these switches being closed, the run stop in the closed or normal position, and you press your starter switch going to earth. That's the electrical sort of starter circuit. That operates the relay, the engine start relay, and what that does, it sends a positive current, i.e. connected via this fuse. You've got your positive side of the battery, goes through the switch, through the relay contact, down to the coil of the solenoid. When that operates, there's a very thick, chunky, live cable which connects straight from the battery. It doesn't go via fuse, straight to, and there's a solenoid contact within the pre-engaged starter motor. And what that does is it connects the motor of the starter motor. Now this solenoid does two things. Firstly, it transfers, so the solenoid operates, it throws the Bendix gear, this little cog, into the flywheel, and at the same time it transfers the current through to the motor. So the motor doesn't start turning until the solenoid has engaged the current and also thrown the Bendix into the engine, the flywheel. Now, the fact that when I press the starter switch, I can hear both the starter relay working and the solenoid, which is a very loud, heavy click, engaging, and that draws a fair bit of current. That's what's dimming the headlights across the bike. So you can see that, and it engages for sort of 5 seconds, and you can see the load on the battery. So that proves all of this side is actually working. And this is an intermittent fault. So when it is actually working, if I put it in neutral, so if I take it out of neutral, it won't start. It will actually start, if it's in neutral, it will actually start with the side stand down. But if you engage, it will then cut out because it doesn't want you pulling away in gear with the side stand down. So it's a safety sort of precaution. So all of this actually currently works. And the fact that the solenoid is clicking, a very loud click, as well as the starter, proves this whole side is not an issue. The main current draw comes from this very thick wire, straight from the battery, the positive side of the battery. And this is all enclosed within one unit, the pre-engaged starter motor. I've checked the cable is in good condition. It's really quite short. It's only about 2 foot long. There's no fuses in that because it would just blow the fuse. And the earth connections. Now this actually earths out through the starter motor itself onto the engine. It's not corroded, but I will, when I take it off, have another look at that and clean it up. So here's the battery, a whacking great 18 ampere hour USA battery. Earth connections all nice and clean, and I've cleaned those, and previously I had them just with a very thin coating of Vaseline, which was in my days of engineering always a good thing to do, but in an attempt to remove any possible issues with Vaseline not conducting electricity, I've removed all of that and cleaned all the terminals. Here's the very thick wire that goes directly to the starter motor on the back here. So it's not even, it may only be about just over 1 foot long, and it connects onto the starter motor. I've just taken the cover off. There's a sort of a plastic cover over the top of it, so you can see it. So as you can see, the red thick starter motor cable comes down here, around the back of here, and terminates just here on the back of the solenoid. the starter motor, this is the actual motor of the starter motor, and this is where the Bendix gear is that engages on the end of the flywheel. This is the solenoid part of it, and so it actually earths out through these two bolts which hold on the starter motor itself. It's all nice and clean. I've checked all of the earthing and the grounding. There's no corrosion on any of the nuts and bolts on the engine mounting, so it should all be really good. I've yet to do any testing of that electrically, but I will be doing it at some point. Now, when I bought the bike, I bought it off a guy, and he showed me it was you know, reasonably well maintained, albeit not the cleanest I've ever seen. But he had bought back in the April of 2018. I bought it in the August. A reconditioned, exchanged starter motor. Purchased, I think it was a cost of £200 from Guzzi Bits in the UK, which is a reputable supplier of Moto Guzzi spares. And I didn't have any real reason to, or any real concern, but maybe that should have flagged up something at that point. Don't know. Anyway, so I've had this apart once already, just have a quick inspection. It all seemed in good, reasonable condition, and all looked fairly new. So yeah, no real problems that became visible. As I said, we know that the low current sort of side from the starter switch right the way through to the starter relay, which is now here, and that drives, there's a, you can see just, yeah, so this little wire here which terminates on the solenoid. So you've got two big contacts. One is the positive, then this is the output, which goes through via a very chunky thick cable onto the starter motor, and this is what they call the starter wire or the control wire, depending on what manual or circuit diagram you're looking at. Now that looks in good condition. I've seen some people saying, oh, this wire's too small, too thin. It only is enough just to trigger the starter the solenoid. The solenoid does all the heavy current draw from there into the motor. So checked out everything, cleaned everything, thought that would cure it, and then it works for half a dozen tries and then doesn't work for 10 times, 10 clicks, and then another day it will start and another day it won't, and yeah, all over the place. And it's really annoying with an intermittent fault. The battery, which all seemed to, I mean, it tests out perfectly on the Optimate, and no corrosion on the terminals, no loose terminals, no damage, and you know, it is the right spec according to UASA. So it's a 18 ampere hour 12 volt high performance sealed battery, and it has a cranking, it was on there somewhere, so it's quite a hefty engine, and therefore you need, by bike battery standards, that is about as big as it gets. Certainly the Ducati is about a third of that. And that's a V-twin as well. So all things considered, it all looked okay. And then I found that from the previous owner, possibly the first, I guess, is that it had 8V Griso engraved on it, either engraved or burnt, whatever. And as you can see there, the date is 26 November 07, which draws me to conclude that this is the original battery. Now, the thing with these Optimates is, yeah, they're testing sort of the life of the battery and all the rest of it, but what they don't really test is a cranking load. So, i.e., will it turn the engine over from cold? And incidentally, mine doesn't really work any better. You know, this intermittent fault is just as likely to happen when it's warm. So it's not a cold starting issue; it's a starting issue. So it's you know, it wasn't unreasonable to think, well, the battery is actually 12 years old. I only really expect to get sort of 5 years out of a battery, so I think it's done very well and tantamount to good maintenance by the previous two owners. So, you know, all things considered, time for a new battery. So there we have it, a new battery. So in the same tradition, I've actually put on there December 2019 and the registration, such that it's actually going to eliminate any possibility about the engine not having the cranking ability, because I haven't got a load tester. I could probably borrow or rent one, but you know, 12-year-old battery, let's go for a new battery. So with new battery, let's just test this again. Nope, and it's not starting. Last night I thought I'll give it a try. It started every time. You could hear the I didn't let it run because it was quite late, and yet it starts every single time. So I've tried sort of tapping the relay, but we know that this is working, so it's not really that. I even tried a little gentle tap, very gentle tap, on the starter motor, just in case, with a rubber mallet, just in case something's a bit sticky or whatever. No different, and you can see it's drawing the current from the headlamp, and I can see the load on the battery. So yeah, really annoying, very frustrating intermittent faults. I've also tried putting it in gear just in case the Bendix is sort of jammed into the engine. Put it in gear, pushed it forward a little bit to turn the engine over, and sort of from the wheel. Doesn't make the slightest bit of difference. There isn't any crunching or grinding or clunking to suggest that it is jammed. It just doesn't start. So everything would suggest it's a starter motor, and without trashing gutsy bits, I don't know whether this is a starter motor that's had that's come back in, had a quick clean up. Yeah, all seems to check all right on the bench, and then just sent out as the next exchange. Again, it is difficult to test it unless you're actually testing it on the engine in a full load environment. So let's take it out, have a look. One last try. Yeah, no avoiding it any longer. I need to get that starter motor out and just clean it within an inch of its life. Right, so I've taken the starter motor out. This is the thick chunky lead, and it's all in good condition. There's no corrosion, there's no breaks in the circuit, and it goes just from there down here around to here. So that goes connects onto the solenoid, and the other thick chunky cable connected to the battery, which I've disconnected, is the earth lead, and that comes and terminates there, and that's nice and tight and there's no corrosion. I will take that off and give that a bit of a clean up as well. And as you can see, the starter motor itself is bolted here. It earths out through the bolts that connect it to the bell house on the engine, and the earth connection is from there literally to this earth back to the battery. So it's not got some long faluted route through engine mountings or whatever. It's from there literally to there. So as long as this surface is clean, which it is clean, but I will be giving that a bit of a sparkle up as well, just to eliminate, and I will dismantle that and clean all that as well. So this is the starter motor. So the little thin bit on the back is the solenoid, and it connects to this the left hand side terminal. The little connector doesn't look as clean as I remember. No, it's not. Yeah, it is clean. That's the starter, the control wire, and then the solenoid pushes through the current via that short braided hose directly into the starter motor itself. And there you can see the bendix which the solenoid throws into the flywheel, which is, you can see that in there, there's the flywheel. So that throws it down there, engages into the flywheel. There's no chipped teeth as far as I can see, or dodgy wear or anything like that, or no evidence to suggest that it's jamming. And that then, as soon as that's engaged, the solenoid also via contacts engages and pushes the current through to the starter motor, which actually turns the motor itself. Okay, let's have a close look on the bench and start stripping that down. Right, so I've got it clamped on the bench because when the motor starts spinning there's a fair amount of inertia, and I've got some jump leads, and I've got it connected to the old battery, which still has a fair bit of life in it. I'm surprised, 12 years old, but one thing I have noticed is that in the continual starting or attempting to start, even if the motor doesn't spin, that it doesn't recover nearly as quickly as the new battery. That's pretty obvious, I guess, because it's 12 years old. But so the new battery was, I think the list price is £186, because it's a fair old lump, and you wouldn't want to put any, I think, lightweight or cheaper sort of Chinese made batteries. But this is says it's made in America, in Reading, Pennsylvania. But certainly I got it on eBay for £92, which I think is a pretty good value from a very reputable supplier of batteries. And I think, you know, despite the fact it hasn't cured the starter problems as yet, I think 12-year-old battery for a new one is pretty good value. So just connect up the battery to the terminal. And interesting enough, there is a plastic or mica kind of insulator between the two terminals, and that's been broken off, I guess, by someone being a bit heavy-handed with the spanner. So I'll just connect the live, making sure it doesn't short out anything else. So I'm going to put it straight on the thick sort of terminal for the solenoid and the earth, which all I need to do is just touch this on the chassis of the starter motor, and hopefully that will spin. No, it doesn't, because obviously it needs a starter wire. So I can put that on there, and then what I need to do is just short circuit from the live to the control wire, which will start the solenoid. Oh, and you can't see that because I'm blocking the camera, but that is working. And as you can see, the bendix shoots forward. So the solenoid is throwing the bendix, the little gear, down the shaft, which would then engage with the, God, I had a terrible day today, with the flywheel, which has got teeth on it. And then the motor engages, the solenoid then pushes the current across to the starter motor, the actual motor itself, and that then turns. And that then turns it. I must admit, I thought it would spin a little bit quicker than that. There's no load, obviously, there's no engine to turn over, and I have to say that's not spinning particularly quickly. Last time I stripped it down, I seem to remember that it turned over a lot quicker than that. And I've just tested this battery on the Optimate, and it is showing fully charged. So that's a little bit surprising. It's working, but I thought it'd be quicker. All right, let's strip it down. So I've dismantled the solenoid. So this is the part that it's sprung loaded, and it holds it down all the time, which holds it off of the flywheel. So that's the sort of the default. And this is when it's magnetized, this pulls back against the spring, which hooks. There's a little hook there on the bottom of that armature, and what that does, as you hook that up, so as it hooks it up, it throws it into, so when it hooks up, it throws it into the flywheel. That all seems to be working very well. It's a little bit dusty on this end, but it spins okay. There's no graunchiness or anything like that. I'm going to test that separately in a second. This is the bit that concerns me, is that when you put a positive on the control wire, the solenoid, as well as providing electromagnet which pulls that Bendix in, actually makes those two connections. So there's a contact in there, but there doesn't appear to be any way of dismantling it. To me, that looks like, yeah, that's pressed. This outer cover is pressed over the relay contact. So I'm going to test it in a minute by putting an earth, I guess, on this one, positive on there, and then just testing whether I'm getting the full voltage across those two terminals. I've read that some people are saying that if these contacts within here, which push the current, the positive, the 12 volts through to the starter motor, are corroded or spiked or whatever, then the voltage may not be enough to actually turn the motor. So the solenoid operates because it's getting the full 12 volts onto the positive wire, this one, but it doesn't, while the contacts forward on the full 12 volts across to the starter motor. So I'm going to test that on this if I can, but it is, I think last time I dismantled it, I did actually just put a little bit of light oil, just like a 3-in-1 oil in there, just to make sure that that wasn't sticking, and that's nice and slippy. No potential problems there. But as we know, when we try and start it, we hear that loud clunk as that magnet shoots in there and pulls across the armature. So nothing to suggest that this isn't actually driving the Bendix. It's the motor either that's a problem, and I'll have a look at that, or the contacts within the solenoid that's not putting enough sufficient voltage to drive that motor. If it is that, I doubt very much whether you can buy that part separately. I'll have to find out. But the problem with an exchange one is that who's to say that this isn't tested on a bench just like I tested it, and deemed to be working okay and just shipped out. Yeah, okay, let's crack on. So just getting out my multimeter, and of course the battery's flat because I left it on. So just replace the battery, taking it out the smoke detector. Just kidding, don't do that at home. Right, so I'm testing the electrical connection, and we know the solenoid works in terms of the electromagnetic. We can hear it clicking, and I've just put this on resistance. I'm checking it, and there's a buzzer as well. So when I actually push the solenoid in, you can hear 0 ohms, so it's making a connection. Again, doesn't check it under load, 30 amps odd, or 45 amps. I think someone said that the actual motor itself draws, but it does work. We know it works some of the time anyway, because it starts the bike, which is very satisfying when it does and very annoying when it doesn't. So I now need to strip down the, let's turn that off, strip down the starter motor itself. And as you can see, without the solenoid armature being held in place by the spring in the solenoid, the Bendix is actually very loose. It's not binding in any way. All seems to suggest it's good. So let's crack on, strip down this motor. So there we can see the brushes in these plastic sort of holders, and just by rotating that, you can see it all looks good. I can see the armature, no damage anywhere on any of the, there's no chipped connections. I suppose I really should pull this out, and this is when all the brushes shoot out, which is going to be a bit of a pain here, as I thought. Oh. Okay, but there's no point pussyfooting about. It's intermittent, I need to eliminate everything. So just looking at this, everything looks good. I will give it a bit of a clean up. Right, let's reassemble that. So I think now we'll clamp it up. We'll put it now live onto the control wire, which is the smaller connector. I have to say, whilst I have disconnected, of course, the battery, this live high current straight from the battery, very thick cable, which is probably rated at about 45 amps, is very close to the rear engine mounting bolt mounted on the frame. So hence the cover. And neither of those are going to move too much, but yeah, you have to be very careful not to put a spanner on that and arc it and weld it to the frame, because you wouldn't want to be disconnecting the battery in a real rush. Oops. Right, that's tight. They're all tightened up. Positive. Just go and check the torque wrench setting of those. So, despite looking and checking all the torque wrench settings for every single nut and bolt on the bike, including the horn mounting and the rear lamp mounting. Doesn't appear to be any torque settings for the bolts holding on the starter motor, so I'll have to have a look at that and check that another day, but they're tight, not overly tight hopefully for the moment, and I think it's a case of start it up, see if that's improved anything. I doubt it very much because I didn't find anything, to be honest, that would suggest there was a problem or that any corrosion or misalignment or anything that would suggest that I've put something right. We'll give it a try. Now, what haven't I done? So, let's move this in because you might not be able to hear this. Some people talk about a quiet click, and I don't know whether you can hear that. When I press the starter, you'll just hear the starter relay clicking. So it's only a small relay. And you can hear that just clicking in. That's because I haven't reconnected the control wire, which is this wire here. Again, proving what I said earlier in terms of the diagram, that if the low current side wasn't working, you wouldn't get the click of the solenoid. So as we know, as you can see here, it's disconnected, it's not been reconnected. Just checking it's all nice and clean, there's no corrosion, it all looks good. No loose wires. Just got to plug that on the... Well, that's a good sign, but that's not the only time that's started, so I'll give it half a dozen goes. One failure already. And there's a second failure, still drawing current from the battery, and then it clicks out after a while. Well, there we have it. We know the low current draw circuit is working. We hear this relay and the solenoid kicks in, but the starter motor, the motor itself, isn't actually turning over intermittently. So at this point, I'm thinking, do I just get a new starter motor? As I mentioned earlier in this video, I looked at Griso Ghetto and I think it's called Wild Goose Chase, and the guys on there have been really helpful, and they're very clever, and they're real experts in gutzes and electrics and so on. And whilst I could sort of follow the chat and the various comments and the like, because what I talked about with the low current side of the circuit, I just didn't get it and thought, no, yeah, but that all works, so it's got to be the starter motor or thereafter. Anyway, carry on, because yeah, I followed their advice. So, without too much intervention, now it works 100% of the time. The only thing that I've been doing is checking voltage, at the starter relay, which is not the relay under the seat where I moved it to, but it's one of the smaller relays of the 3 relays in the side panel. So in checking all of that and testing all of that, because it didn't work after I stripped the motor down consistently. So I've been back on the forums and read all of the detail, and there's a guy called Kiwi Roy who's done some fantastic work with an oscilloscope testing the amount of current for how long taken to engage the solenoid. And whilst that's all kind of on the low current side of things, it's an easy fix for if you just get the starter relay click and not the solenoid click, or perhaps the fault is that the solenoid isn't banging in quick enough, therefore being slower, drawing too much current for a longer period of time and taking away some of the oomph that would otherwise go straight to the motor itself and crank the engine. So it involves using some much thicker cable, because the wiring from the starter relay to the solenoid, the trigger wire or the S wire, whatever you want to call it, is very, very small, on the assumption that it's only drawing 10 amps. And what Kiwi Roy is saying is that there's 2 coils in the solenoid. One starts throws in the solenoid, and then secondly a smaller one, a smaller drain, on smaller draw of the current to hold that solenoid in while the engine turns. But initially it's much bigger, especially if it's not making a proper connection. So, and a lot of people have been blowing fuses. So what I'm going to do is use much thicker wire. In fact, this is 27 amp cable, and so much more copper in there, but also a much thicker insulation as well, so that's never a bad thing. And I'm going to run via a inline fuse straight from the battery straight to the relay contacts in the starter relay, and then the other side of the starter relay contact will go straight from there to the control wire terminal on the solenoid. What that does is it removes all of the lengthy wiring through the loom, and the colours are different on the starter relay to the actual starter wire. So some point on the input it goes from the battery via the fuse through the ignition switch back through various parts of the wiring loom to the contact of the starter relay, and then the other side of the starter relay goes back into the wiring loom, in and about, and then back. So a lot of extra wire, there must be some splicing, factory splicing going on at that point, and increasing the resistance, and the more points, the longer the wire, the thinner the wire, the more points of connection increase, all of those increase risk for resistance and a drain on the voltage and current. So we're providing a very, very short circuit, battery, fuse, inline fuse, relay contact, other side of the relay contact, straight to the starter motor, all in nice thick copper. Quite a simple fix. It's going to take me half an hour to do that. Why wouldn't you? Let's give that a try. Even though the engine's starting 100% of the time already. I'm not going to wait until it starts mysteriously going wrong again, because guaranteed it'll be in a petrol garage in the middle of nowhere, or pulling out into a junction or something if I stall or something, and it will not start. And I can't afford to be playing around for 10 minutes. So let's go and do that. So here you can see the this cable here is the original starter control wire. You see how thin and weedy that is compared to the nice, much thicker, better cable for the solenoid to operate. I've wired in a new battery lead via an inline fuse down to the starter relay and output contact, and then the other side of the output contact down through to a new starter control wire. So I'm going to start off with a 20 amp fuse. It's a 27 amp cable, so that should be okay. Okay, let's give it a try. Well, it still works, and I've disconnected all the original wiring, and that's all been heat shrink wrapped and tied back with cable ties. So, but then it wasn't failing just before I did it. Oh dear, how annoying is that? Still, time will tell. So that's the mod that they recommend, and I can kind of follow it. And in my time in electrical engineering, simple wiring is very simple to follow and understand when it goes right and when it goes wrong, and it can be just tiny little tolerances out and all the rest of it. The weirdest things happen. So I am prepared to accept that this might be the cure, and that the solenoid now is going to ram in 4 times quicker and draw, I think it was half the current or something, over a lot, sorry, or more current, but for a quarter of the time. So yeah, we'll see. I'll keep you updated. If it fails in the next couple of days, you might even get it on the end of this video. Let's hope not. Okay, cool. So just as a way of follow-up, here we are several weeks later, and several, no, not several hundreds, many starts later, still not a single misfire. So, one last check. This is where it proves me wrong. How do I sink it in neutral? There we are. And there we have it, every time. So thanks again, Kiwi Roy from Griso Ghetto. Yeah, you're right. And if you do ever get around to watching this, you can confidently say, "Oh, I told you so." But yeah, well done. A simple mod, but I'd recommend it to anyone who has any intermittent starting problems. And yeah, I'm a bit of a numpty for not realising that the starter relay in question was the one that I hadn't moved. It's a smaller relay in the side panel and not the one that I'd moved to the tail. So hey ho, it's all fun, isn't it? You know, one of the things that I think it's on Kiwi Roy's signature on Griso Ghetto is Moto Guzzi making electricians out of motorcyclists, and I thought that was a bit harsh, but you're so right. See you next time.